Chapter 5 The 54th Day. Xenos came very slowly across the courtyard, leaning on Conan's arm, a thin young man in a long tunic with his face still scarred and discolored from his burns, though his hair and beard were now neatly trimmed. His wounds were nearly healed, but his body still seemed drained of strength, and he could only walk with difficulty because his left leg was swollen. Behind his back, Lucia had often pursed her lips and wondered if her first fears were right, and he would never fully recover. She was especially afraid that the dreams that came at night to wake him, lost in a wild darkness of pain and terror, might never leave him. Philo noticed from the dark shadows under Xenos' eyes that he had still not fully recovered from the most recent of those nights. "Come and sit here." He arranged the cushions on the couch. "I can't do my homework." Xenos eased himself down and lay back with his eyes shut. "I'll answer any questions I can, but don't ask me to read anything. I worked for too long on the copy of the Satires of Horace for the Archon, and my eyes feel as if they're burnt out for good." "You know you oughtn't to do so much. Honestly, Xenos, anyone would think you were saving up to buy your freedom." Conan raised his eyebrows at his brother and pulled a face, and no one said anything for a while. Then Philo, in a small voice, said, "I'm sorry, that was silly. I suppose in a way you are." "Yes, I thought you might see that for yourself," said Xenos, who did not seem annoyed. "Of course I don't need the money at the moment, but who knows what I shall need when, if it comes." "Money for a journey?" asked Conan. "Probably just that. One of the few things I'm sure about is that I don't come from Philadelphia, or someone would have claimed me by now. I may remember duties that are long overdue and need to make a rapid journey." "If the roads are safe." "Yes, always supposing that, and that I'm well enough. Now, what about this homework, Latin or Greek?" Latin was a skill which had to be mastered for business, not conversation or pleasure, but Xenos had discovered that he spoke it as easily as the boys did their native Greek, and Philo was exceptionally quick with languages anyway. When the immediate problem had been solved, Xenos opened his eyes and caught Philo looking at him. "What is it? Is there something else?" "It's something rather peculiar. I've been wondering for a long time if I should tell you, if it would help or upset you." "If it's important, as you seem to think it is, perhaps we should find out." Philo had started now and could not back out, so he began in a rush. "From the beginning we found out things about you that you didn't know yourself. There's something else you haven't been able to see. Do you remember about your back?" "What about it?" "Only that once, some time ago, you've had a very bad flogging." "Long ago?" "Yes, I don't know, perhaps 5 years. The scars are quite white and starting to fade, but it must have been a proper flogging. They're very level, and there's a lot of them." "Worse than anything you've had, and not done by a bad-tempered schoolmaster. I see." Zeno shut his own eyes again and leaned his head back. Philo thought he was quite calm until he noticed that his fingers had clenched round the end of the couch. "You remember the time you told us what happened that night on the pass to Macaris? You said then something strange, and that I've wondered about the pain, that it was as if it had all happened before and it could happen again, like a dream that keeps coming back." "Did I say that? I can't remember anything about telling you what happened. It was early on, wasn't it?" He sat up painfully and bent forward so that his face was hidden, his hand picking at the fringe of a cushion. "My family, whatever family I had, they're so much a blank that I think I can never have had one. Perhaps I was a slave. Perhaps I still am, an escaped slave." "No, you don't talk like one. They all sound different, even the clever ones," said Conan. "Thank you, but then why was I beaten?" He wriggled his shoulder blades as if trying to remember the forgotten scars. "I was clearly not a citizen, or I wouldn't have been. It's almost more of a puzzle than it was before. I think there must have been friends, even if there was no family, and work, and some reason for me to be in Galilee or Judea. But in the center of it all, there is still the great emptiness that has been there from the first moment when I woke in the dark and felt your hands and heard your voices. What do I believe? What have I lived by my whole life? What sort of a man am I? It's more important than the name of my best friend, the crime for which I was punished." He turned back to them suddenly. "My friend!" His face seemed to light up, and then the animation sank again, like the flare when a wick has failed to light. Someone almost came then. He raised a hand and let it fall. Conan, will you help me? It's not as warm as I'd thought. They walked slowly back across the courtyard and disappeared through the door. Philo, said Conan when he came back, you took a chance. It's his back. He had a right to know. I thought it might help. Perhaps it has, even if it doesn't show it yet. He'll go back and think now, and it may be like a stiff key. You try it several ways before it opens the lock. Floodgate, more likely. I was suddenly afraid it would all come out and we wouldn't know what to do, said Philo. If only Father was here. How long has he been gone? 53 days, isn't it? It could be another 20 before he gets back, and so much could have happened by then, and the rains will have made the roads bad. Alone in his room, Zenos, the stranger even to himself, lay on his back with his hands behind his head. The stiff legs still throbbed, and there was a place across his stomach where the thin scar skin kept cracking and the raw places itched. Otherwise, he was not at the moment so much uncomfortable as tired, with a weariness and weakness that never seemed to leave him. He was glad the boy had told him, although he knew that now there would be more hours during the long nights when the absence of memory would plague him, and he would wake from a nightmare not knowing if it was true or if Philo's words had fed it into his mind. He sat up and undid the shoulder clasps of his borrowed tunic so that it slid down. No, there was no way he could see his back. But now he knew that they were there. He could feel the low ridges across his shoulders. He eased himself back onto the bed, instinctively turning onto his stomach, which he had not done for a long time, with his face in the pillow, and his eyes were wet, not because he had strained them with work, but because he knew how it had felt when he had lain like this before, and there was a voice and a joy mixed with pain he had been feeling that did not make any sense to him now. But the voice was the clearest thing about it, young yet full of authority, a voice that was very important to him, saying, I wouldn't have told you now if I thought it would upset you. I only wanted to give you something good to think about before you slept. So there had been a friend. He had guessed truly, and perhaps sleep would give him back fully to the unfurnished loneliness of his mind. The next day was a holiday. There was a cold wind from the north that sent a white cloud scudding across a sky of a far paler blue than had hung above the city all summer. It was a day for walking rather than sitting in the courtyard. Philo was glad enough when Lucia found him, an errand down to the market. Conan had already gone out early to meet his friend Jason, and Nicanor was with his cousin, Charles, on his farm to the north of the city. He had not spoken of the dead mare for some time, but Philo knew she was not forgotten. Nicanor was recovered enough to go back to working with those animals that were left, but no one could tell what the shock had really meant to him. He had not talked about it, and it was as if he had pushed away the very memory of it deep down into his mind. Lucia did not trust the kitchen girl with any except the simplest errands, and with Conan too important now and Nicanor away, she had a habit of keeping Philo busy. It was colored thread she needed this time. He had a hank to match, so it was not difficult, and he quickly found what he wanted at one of the little shops in the arches of the back of the arcade that edged the marketplace. He stowed it away in his wallet and walked over to the fountain in the middle to see if he could find any of his friends. "Were you looking for your brother?" asked a young man who was a former school friend of Conan's. "No, not really. I just saw him now with the son of Eupopotamus." "He's old enough to choose his own friends," said Philo uncomfortably, trying to edge away. This had been going on for more than a month, ever since, partly occupied with his father's business, Conan had given up his studies and had more time on his hands. But this friendship with Jason, the son of Eupopotamus, had been bad news to the family. Although the young man was handsome and amusing, he was no friend for anyone who needed to watch what money he spent, and yet loved fine things as Conan had always done. Suddenly, even more than usual, Philo wished that his father was home again. He turned back towards the steep road that led around to the eastern slope of the citadel towards home. But before he had left the marketplace, he heard his own name called twice in a voice that he knew, loud enough to cut through the market racket, and yet in some unfamiliar way. He turned and saw Conan there, in the center of a small group of men, a cluster clearly marked out for the indolence of the stall holders and loungers by their grave faces and the way that they surrounded his brother as if he was something fragile and about to break. Philo ran back down the slope towards him, thinking he must be suddenly ill or that Nicanor had had an accident. People stopped what they were doing to turn and watch him, so that when he reached the group at the edge of the square, they were at the center of a large and inquisitive crowd. Conan's face was an odd color, pasty beneath the normal tan. The hands he was trying to keep at his sides were shaking. He looked round despairingly at the ring of faces. "Philo, come home with me now. Not here, but I must tell you." But a voice behind his shoulder that sounded like Paulinus at his most unctuous said, "Look at the poor child, only 14. What an age to become an orphan." The word did not mean anything. From the first moment that he had seen Conan's face, Philo had known that something had gone. One of those things had happened which changed the future and set it off in a different direction. But he was still thinking of Nicanor and some stupid or painful accident that would be difficult to cope with while his father was away. Then it seemed a long while after, in the time it took to cover the last 5 paces, his mind pulled him up short with the lurch that comes with one when one has slept for just a moment. Father! That was what orphan meant, a child without a father. Conan swung round angrily, but it was too late. The word had been spoken, and Philo caught at his arm, stammering, his face dissolving as a smacked child does, suddenly crimson, the tears spurting from his eyes. Conan did the only thing he could to hide what he saw in the face and what the crowd could see. He pulled his young brother close to him, wrapped a fold of his cloak around him, and began to lead him up to the hill towards home. The crowd fell back, and only the men who had known Apollodorus well were there by the time they had turned the last corner. Philo was quieter now, so Conan stopped and held him further away, speaking as gently as he could. "Paulinus told me too. He had it from a caravan leader just up from the south. It was in the last mountains before the sea at Eliot. Robbers, he said, and father died fighting. It must have been 10 days ago. He thinks Esdras was killed as well. It was at night." Philo wiped his face on his brother's cloak and drew a deep, hiccuping breath. He would not give the watching men the satisfaction of seeing any more of his grief. The numbness of a severe wound was already coming over him. This he could not now accept. He had been told it. Slowly he would understand, but meanwhile he must think, not feel. There was the household to think about, and Nicanor, more than Conan could possibly cope with alone. At the door of the house, Conan suddenly turned on the men who were still with them, thanked them for their concern, hoped to see them later, and then got himself and his brother inside the house alone with the gate shut behind them. Zenos was working in his room, and Lucia was standing in the doorway talking to him. She had turned, hearing the voices outside the gate, and something in the sound of them to make her feel uneasy. At the sight of Conan's face, her hands went to her mouth. Conan, looking suddenly very like his father, was gentle with her. He put an arm around her shoulders and pushed her through the doorway of Zenos' room and sat her down on the bed. The man looked up from the table at which he had been writing and put his pen down very deliberately and slowly. "Conan, what's happened?" Conan sat down on the bed beside Lucia and took her twisted hands in his. "It's father." Paulinus heard. "The master's been hurt?" From her eyes, Lucia already understood, but she said it all the same. Conan shook his head. "It was in the mountains near Eliot 10 days ago. Robbers. We don't know any more." Then it was he who had put his head on her shoulder, and her arms came around him while she patted and clucked as she had when he was a little boy with a grazed knee. Philo was standing in the doorway. Everything seemed far away, as if there were a barrier between him and the other people in the room. Conan's sobbing was a very long way off, and within himself was the beginning of a pain so deep that he struggled to keep it back. Terrified of losing himself under the weight of it, he started to shiver. Zenos had been sitting with his head bowed. He got up carefully and looked at the boy. "This is certain?" "Conan says so." Zenos stood close to him, but did not touch him. Philo wiped a hand across his face and said, "Nico, I shall have to go." Zenos opened his mouth to protest and then shut it again. It was too much to ask of Philo, but who else was there to send? Conan could not go yet, and anyway, as the eldest he should stay in the house. The business of death did not allow much time for grieving. Conan shook himself and sat up. "Take the mule and try to bring him back. We should be together." Philo turned and went out without a word. Looking after him, Zenos remembered Apollodorus, for the man had been not only as a father of his children, and this good man, now dead, had saved his life at some risk to his own, and brought him into his home. Apollodorus himself had said that a god must have moved him to it. Could it be that the purpose behind that action was now plain? Xenos felt weariness that was not only in his body, and yet at the same time something that was not yet quite hope, but more a relief that the future was not quite so shapeless as he had imagined.